It's my pleasure this evening to welcome you to the Nebraska History Museum and our second in our series of lectures as part of our special program, We the People, the Nebraska Viewpoint, subtitled Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, Understanding the Past, Looking to the Future. This is a year-long project. We're just getting started. As I said, this is our second lecture. There are a series of lectures, brown bags, which happen here at noon. Also a couple of scheduled community conversations, which we hope some of you will come back for and help us explore in a free discussion approach these concepts of constitutionalism, law, liberty, who is included in the American we, if you will. And we look forward to that. A couple other parts of the project. One just came off the press today, and this is our fall-winter 2010 issue of Nebraska History. And it's a double issue, and it addresses the issue of and the exciting story of African American history in our state. So this comes, if you're a member, you'll get this in the mail probably later this week, I hope. And if you're not, you can take a membership. We invite you to do that. It's the best way to get involved in Nebraska history is to be a member of the Nebraska State Historical Society, where you'll receive our journal and a lot of other benefits. So our brochures are in the back, and our folks in the store would be happy to help you with that. We will also be opening our exhibit on this subject matter, which will be opening on January 5, 2011, out here, right here in this institution. And while I'm advertising, I will also mention our exhibit on the third floor. I don't know if you'll have time to see that tonight, but please come back on Willa Cather, one of our best-known Nebraskans, and a very, very interesting personality. And by using her clothing and accoutrements, the things she collected, wore, and lived with throughout her life from our collection and from the collection of the Willa Cather Memorial Foundation in Red Cloud, I think we're able to get a different view of Willa Cather that also helps us to understand her and the strong personality and wonderful writer that she was. But tonight we're here for a very special lecture by Dr. James Wrighting-In, who is Associate Professor of American Indian Studies at Arizona State University. Dr. Wrighting-In is a member of the Pawnee tribe. He attended the Haskell Indian School in Kansas, then Fort Lewis College or University in Colorado, and then went to UCLA in Los Angeles for his master's degree and his doctorate. He's been associated with Arizona State for many, many years, first in the College of Social Justice, and now as director of the associate professor and director of the American Indian Studies program. He is also editor of the Wichasha Review, published by the University of Minnesota Press, and chair of the board of trustees of the Pawnee Nation College. He is well known in American Indian and American Indian scholarship circles. He has written extensively on a wide variety of subjects, and tonight he's going to share with us his thoughts on the Pawnee and American colonialism. Dr. Wrighting-In. James.
Good evening. How's everyone this evening? I'm honored that you came out to hear me speak tonight. It's always a pleasure to come back to Nebraska. And, when we say we, the people of Nebraska, at one time, us Pawnees could say that we were one of the first peoples of Nebraska. And I'm going to talk about some of the hard truths about why we are no longer in Nebraska tonight. And that's why I entitled my presentation, if I can figure out this technology, about Pawnee Indians and U.S. colonialism, civil liberty matters on the 19th century Central Plains. One of the problems I had when John Carter, my good friend John, asked me to be a part of this speaker series was to figure out how am I going to fit civil liberty matters into what I do, because the Constitution did not apply to Indians, and civil liberties didn't. But what I decided, the context I'm using, is that civil liberties were a political value of American society, but these civil liberties were often not extended to Pawnee people or other Indians. And so that's the fit. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to talk about some hard truths tonight. And oftentimes white America has a hard time dealing with the hard truths about American Indian experiences under the United States' domination. Let me begin by saying that there is a sanitized version of history that proclaims that Pawnees never waged war against the United States government, and that the famous Pawnee Scouts were brave, faithful, and obedient followers of their white commanders. This story suggests erroneously that Pawnees enjoyed a cozy and friendly relationship with white Americans, the United States government, and the U.S. Army. This yarn also belies the harmful consequences that U.S. expansionism inflicted on Pawnees both before and after the formation of the first Pawnee Scout enlistment in 1864. It ignores the fact that U.S. policymakers and agents had literally subjected Pawnees, along with other Indians, under what Lumbee legal scholar Robert Williams terms in his seminal study about the U.S. Supreme Court and Indians, a white racial dictatorship. So this is the premise of my presentation. I'm going to talk about a little bit about this in the context of colonialism. So the rise of this colonial dictatorship over Indians is not such a far-fetched notion if we keep in mind that the U.S. Constitution legitimated slavery during the antebellum years, and this was a brutal institution that stripped the enslaved of their civil rights and human dignity, and a flagrant contradiction of U.S. political values. With its roots stemming back to the colonial experiences of Great Britain in North America, this dictatorship rests on four interrelated principles or factors. The first is that an expansionistic vision held by this new settler nation that its citizens had a manifest destiny to spread its civilization across a continent into lands belonging to others. The second is a belief among white Americans that they occupied a lofty status of intellectual and cultural superiority over non-Indians, over non-whites, including Indians. A third is a long-established litany of racial stereotypes that cast Indians as inferior and vicious savages who use land wastefully. A final is a willingness of white America to expropriate lands through the exertion of power, diplomacy, corruption, and violence. Racist laws, policies, and U.S. Supreme Court decisions formed the legal foundation of this racial dictatorship, and these factors also sanctioned colonialism. As the settler nation pushed its borders westward, those Indians who stood in the way saw unprecedented and mostly unwelcome change come into their lives. These disruptions, including the loss of their life, freedom, land, and life-sustaining resources, brought tremendous devastation to Indian peoples. Put in the context of U.S. political rhetoric, the effects of colonialism literally deprived Indians of their life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, while exempting them from civil liberties emanating from the U.S. Bill of Rights and U.S. Constitution. And I see this exemption as being actually a good thing because Indians are not a part of the Constitution. Indians and their governments predate the forming of the Constitution for thousands of years. And if the United States government would have tried to include Indians within the Constitution, then it would have been another act of colonialism. The way that Indians did become included or subjected under the Constitution was by Supreme Court decisions, treaties, and acts of Congress. So rather than curbing acting to curb these acts of subjugation, domination, and genocide, the U.S. government urged forward by its citizens' impulses proceeded as if the imperialistic behavior conformed with acceptable, if not contradictory, standards of morality and decency held so dear by the masses of the embryonic democracy for themselves. Indians of the 19th century, Indians in the 19th century white American mindset stood beyond the scope of humanity, unworthy of respect and dignity. I should also note that it's my belief that white Americans should have extended the civil liberties to Indians, the right to a fair trial, the right to religious freedom, so forth and so on, because they did this to visitors to this country. Visitors to this country had a right to bear arms, they had a right to visit, to worship freely, they had a right to a fair trial. But for Indians, this was not the case. When the U.S. government came into existence in the late 1780s, its officials recognized the sovereignty of Indian nations and dealt with them on a government-to-government relationship. And that's primarily because Indians had power, and the United States government had just fought a bloody Revolutionary War. It was indebted, and it's actually saw Indian land as a way to come out of its debt. Because Indians owned and occupied the North American interior, lands coveted by white Americans, the United States treated Indians as actual and potential enemies, however. White Americans during this century generally embraced the twin notions of white superiority and Indian inferiority. And their racial consciousness served as a perceptual filter that shaped the conceptualization and implementation of a national policy of territorial aggrandizement that had harmful consequences on Indians. I got carried away, and I had a few slides that I wanted to show you along the way about Pawnee Scouts and people who risked their lives, not only for the United States but also for the Pawnee people, because this was a military alliance that the Pawnees entered into in the 1860s. But this military alliance did not work out for the Pawnee people, and we were removed from Nebraska. And I'll talk more about that as the lecture proceeds. Early in this country's history, the United States' history, the federal government adopted this policy expressed in the Northwest Ordinance of 1787 that said that the utmost good faith shall always be observed toward Indians, their lands, property, and shall never be taken from them without their consent, and in their property, rights, and liberty. They shall never be invaded or disturbed, but laws founded in justice and humanity shall from time to time be made for wrongs done to them and for preserving peace and friendship with them. Well, it would have been good if this philosophy would have been carried out by the government, but it wasn't. This is a scene of Pawnee life. This is Pawnee Territory. I think it's much more extensive than on this map. The Kansas were actually sort of newcomers into Pawnee lands, as were the other groups who had migrated down the Ohio River into the Great Plains. So they began to encroach upon Pawnee lands, and Pawnees made accommodations for them, more or less. The Pawnees were not willing to accept the newcomers into their lands, the white Americans. And in 1822, a Pawnee leader by the name of Sarisadis visited Washington, D.C. with other Indians. And the purpose of this trip was to show Indian leaders of the Central Plains the power of the United States government, in hopes that Indians would stop the encroachments of non-Indians on their lands. So This is a fairly long speech that this leader gave, and he compared, the white Americans with Pawnees and found a lot of commonalities between the two. But in the context of what I'm talking about is the third bullet point here, and it's that he told the President of the United States, the Secretary of War, and others there that we have plenty of buffalo, beaver, and deer, and other wild animals. We have an abundance of horses. We have everything we want. We have plenty of land if you keep your people off of it. And as we know, that wasn't the case. Pawnees had a long history before this of protecting their land and resources from encroachments. Beginning during the late 1860s and early 1870s, Pawnees allowed Frenchmen into their towns for the purpose of trade. But the Pawnee relationship with the Spanish was different because the Pawnees knew what was going on in New Mexico with the Pueblos. The Pueblos had been politically subjugated by Spain. And the Pawnees wanted to maintain their freedom. They wanted to maintain their way of life. So in 1720, when a Spanish expedition was sent to the Central Plains to try to investigate reports that the French were trying to establish a presence there, the Pawnees, aided by some Otos, struck a preemptive blow against the spread of Spanish colonialism. So, throughout the Americas, Spain had used brutal force, plunder, to subjugate Indian nations and to enslave those people who fell under their power. So the Pawnees, as I mentioned, were well aware of the Spanish and what they had done in New Mexico. So that expedition was led by a Spanish commander from Santa Fe by the name of Villasur. So following that defeat, Spain never attempted to control the Pawnee Confederacy and use through the use of military might. I should say that when the United States came into contact with the Pawnees, what ensued, was what Michael Mann calls murderous ethnic cleansing. And that means that the rapidly approaching white Americans wanted Pawnee land and that they were willing to take it by whatever means possible. And before they got to the plains, this ethnic cleansing had been taking place east of the Mississippi River. So colonialism is about the taking the land and resources belonging to others and the subjugation of the indigenous landowners by fiat, coercion, and violence. And that's what the Spanish colonizers brought over. That's what the English colonizers brought over. That's what others brought over. So the U.S. Constitution preamble, which begins with the words, "We the people of the United States," quite correctly, the "we" did not apply to untaxed Indians because of their status as members of independent nations. In American Indians, American Justice, Vine Deloria and his co-author Clifford Lytle state that U.S. policymakers considered Indians as members of small nations who would never become citizens, and I'm quoting here, who would remain forever outside the political institutions of the United States. Deloria and Lytle reasoned that the Constitution was framed during the late 1780s, and white Americans lacked a concern over the political status of Indians to the west because the interior of the continent, and I'm quoting again, could not be inhabited by civilized people, and that there would always be a wilderness populated by tribes of Indians some distance from the centers of civilization. So those 55 white elitist males who came together in 1787 to form a strong central government recognized the inherent sovereignty of Indians and their independent status. They simply placed authority of Congress to regulate commerce with foreign nations, among the several states, and with Indian tribes. The administrative branch was given the power to enter into treaties with foreign nations, including Indian nations, with the consent of Congress. And the fear of U.S. citizens about the abuse of federal power led to the inclusion of those constitutional amendments designed to guarantee personal liberties, the right of religious freedom, to bear arms, to a fair trial, to live free of government persecution, to live free of, so there'd be freedom from cruel and unusual punishment, and other civil liberties enumerated in the Bill of Rights. But what happened was that a series of Supreme Court decisions did, in fact, affirm the extra-constitutional status of Indians. As I mentioned, U.S. society used racist language and its power to elevate white Americans to a position of superiority over Indians, political superiority, and also to denigrate them as inferior, through expressions of popular culture, through expressions of political rhetoric, and so forth and so on. In 1783, George Washington, the first U.S. president, used the Indian as a wolf metaphor to encourage Congress to implement a policy of ethnic cleansing against Indians of the Ohio Valley and beyond. This is a part of his talk. A few years later, in 1807, President Thomas Jefferson used virtually the same language of the Indian as bestial, war-loving savages, writing, "If ever we are constrained to lift a hatchet against any tribe, we will never lay it down till the tribe is exterminated or driven beyond the Mississippi. In war, they will kill some of us. We shall destroy all of them." So that's an expression of genocide and the United States government's willingness to use extermination to accomplish its goals of obtaining Indian land if Indians resisted. And a few years before that, Jefferson had purchased France's Doctrine of Discovery claim to Pawnee land and another and much more land. So the Doctrine of Discovery is one of those fictive creations of Europeans to say that they have ownership rights over Indians. Over Indian lands, excuse me. So not long after the Louisiana Purchase, Jefferson deployed an armed expedition to gather demographic information about Indian nations, to collect scientific information, and to inform Indians encountered along the way that they now lived under the political authority of the United States. And the first U.S. delegation to visit the Pawnees, or at least one Pawnee town along the present-day Kansas-Nebraska border, happened in 1806 when Zebulon Pike and his small force arrived there. And it was a very contentious meeting. And during that meeting, Pike told his host that they were now under the political supremacy of the United States. So during the succeeding years, the U.S. Supreme Court handed down a series of decisions based on discourses of racist notions and colonial privilege that undermined Indian sovereignty, legitimized land losses, sanctioned religious oppression, and legitimized other human rights violations. In an 1823 decision, the McIntosh v. Johnson decision, John Marshall, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, said that with discovery, the title to the land passed from the discovering European nation, it passed from the Indians to the discovering European nation, and that Indians only had the right of occupancy to those lands, and that right of occupancy could be terminated by either purchase or by conquest. The Supreme Court went on to further define the legal status of Indians in ways that subjected them under the political supremacy of the United States. In 1831, the Supreme Court held that Indians were not foreign nations, but domestic dependent nations living in a state of tutelage or pupillage. And John Marshall characterized the relationship of the U.S. government with Indians as one resembling a guardian with his ward. The following year, in 1832, the Supreme Court stated again that Indian nations were under the political supremacy of the United States government, but that state laws did not apply to them on Indian lands. So this is a part of the political, intellectual environment that was accompanying U.S. expansion as the embryonic nation pushed westward into the interior. And in doing so, these movements sparked conflicts and removal treaties. A lot of blood was spilled along the way. Increasingly, white Americans demanded that Indians forfeit their customary ways of living, adopt Christianity, and live in accordance with white American values, beliefs, and worldview. But the vanguard of this invasion, wasn't really concerned about those issues. It was more concerned about trying to see that Indians were placated and would not resist U.S. expansion. The first treaty that the Pawnees entered into with the United States was in 1818, and it was just a treaty of peace and friendship. And in that treaty, the United States said it would serve as a protector to the Pawnees, whatever that means. It means that they would pretty much do whatever they wanted to with the Pawnees once they gained the power to do so. So that's the again, the context of the Pawnee Chiefs' talk. The Pawnees' determination to resist expansion, to preserve their own ways, and to live in accordance with the way of life given to them by Titawahut, or the Pawnee Creator. There are many incidences that I could speak about, or episodes, but I want to kind of focus on the trails that went through Pawnee land, and then I'm going to talk about the reservation period, and then the incorporation of Pawnees under the U.S. Judicial system. Okay, the roads or trails, as they are called, carved through Pawnee lands, intensified the conflict and led to a process whereby the U.S. military came to the scene not as impartial dispensers of justice, but as protectors of white Americans. And there were two major trails that went through Pawnee lands. The first was the Santa Fe Trail. I just finished an extensive study for the Park Service on the Santa Fe Trail. The Santa Fe Trail ran from Missouri to Santa Fe, initially an international road that Missouri traders opened up so they could carry on commerce with New Mexico. The historiography of the Santa Fe Trail is very lacking, and it just presents the trail as a grand chapter in American nation building, and it really doesn't discuss the negative consequences of the trail on indigenous peoples. And that's what the National Park Service wanted me to do, was to look at that relationship and to provide an Indian perspective of it. There's a book that just came out called White Shell Place if I recall, by the water, White Shell Place water, and it's Indian voices concerning the 400-year commemoration of Santa Fe. And I did a chapter in that called Colonial Indians and the Santa Fe Trail of Tears and Conquest, with the subtitle, Challenging the Master Narrative. So I think that study is going to shake up the good old boys who have written all these really lopsided histories about the trail. But what was very problematic from a Pawnee context was that the white Americans who established these trails, and nor their government ever tried to establish permission or gain permission from the Pawnees to cross through their lands along the Arkansas River. So it was an act of encroachment. And it was much more troubling than that, because these intruders traveling back and forth between Santa Fe and Missouri and vice versa disrupted Pawnee life by killing game, particularly the buffalo, on which the Pawnees relied for food, clothing, and implementation. It was also a very important part of the Pawnee religion, spirituality. So the U.S. officials refused to keep out trespassers or try to police their criminal behavior. Pawnees sought to preserve their quality of life by taking punitive measures against the interlopers, occasionally taking life and property. Consequently, the Pawnees developed a reputation as being powerful, predatory savages. And that image became further solidified with each passing year, up until about the 1850s, when the Pawnees were pretty much devastated by disease and other factors. But what the Pawnee actions did, along with those other Indians who resisted the Santa Fe Trail, was to lead to harsh calls for punishment, if not their extermination. The United States government did enter into right-of-way treaties with the Kaw and Osage nations in 1825, but again, they did not do so with the Pawnees. To get back to the imagery of Pawnees held by white Americans, it led to what Pawnees considered an act of genocide committed by Santa Fe traders. In 1831, a smallpox epidemic swept through the Pawnee towns, killing about half of the Pawnee population, about 10,000 or so people. And it was the Pawnees' assertion that Santa Fe traders had intentionally some of their people gifts infected with the deadly smallpox virus. But did the government take any action to investigate this? No. So, this was pretty common when white Americans committed acts against Indians. The federal government really didn't investigate them, or if they did, nothing was really done. 1864, I'm going to jump a little bit ahead in time, was a time when Comanches, Kiowas, and others were beginning to disrupt the Santa Fe Trail traffic on a more regular basis. And this was a time when the United States government moved from sending roving patrols to the area to begin to establish its first permanent forts. And that one was a Fort Man. Actually, it was a temporary fort that was set up in the mid-1840s along the Arkansas River. A group of passing Pawnees were lured into the fort with the soldiers pretending like they wanted peace. About 60 Pawnees responded by entering the fort unarmed. And once they got inside the fort, these Pawnees became alarmed by the sight of these soldiers preparing for battle. Most of the Pawnees escaped, making it through the gate and to the river. But a few of them fell mortally wounded, and about 20 others were wounded by the soldiers. Despite the soldiers' guilt for organizing and carrying out this massacre or attempted massacre, U.S. officials only expelled the bungling commanding officer from Indian country. Nothing was done to them for this act. In 1840, early 1840s, the Oregon-Mormon Trail opened up that ran more directly through Pawnee land along the Platte River, and it came up from Missouri up to the Blue River and up to the Platte River. So this trail was more disruptive than the Santa Fe Trail on the Pawnees because of its proximity to the Pawnee towns. And again, U.S. officials did not attempt to gain Pawnee permission for this trail. I should have mentioned that in 1833, the Pawnees entered into their first land cession treaty with the federal government. And according to the Pawnee view of this treaty, they were only ceding a small section of land for the Delawares, who are one of these groups that were being removed from east of the Mississippi River to the west of the Mississippi River as a part of the U.S. government's policy of ethnic cleansing. But the written version of the treaty said that the Pawnees had ceded all their lands south of the Platte River. So, the Pawnees, in my interpretation, never did give up their claim to that land until a little later in time. So the Oregon Trail, the Mormon Trail, created conflict. In 1848, the Pawnees ceded another strip of land on the Platte River at Grand Island, where soldiers established Fort Kearny, which was about 1 day's march from the Pawnee towns. And the proximity of that fort to the Pawnees became a very disruptive factor, a threat. Soldiers there occasionally distributed food to starving Pawnees, but they also fought and terrorized Pawnees. In a occurrence that happened in the spring of 1847, Chowees, there's 4 Pawnee bands that I didn't mention. The Pawnees are actually a confederacy of 4 confederated nations or tribes or bands, whatever you want to call them. The Chowee, Kikahaki, Pitahawidat, and Skidi. And there was the Chowees, a faction of them, led by another individual by the name of Sadi Sadis, was the ones that took the most aggressive action against the Santa Fe Trail and also the Oregon Trail. In the spring of 1847, some men from his town killed a large number of oxen belonging to an immigrant train. And after investigating the charges, U.S. agent Alexander McElroy reported that Chowees were planning to rob and kill more whites. And a short time later, Pawnee stole about 80 mules from a U.S. government train near Fort Kearny. This U.S. agent, backed by U.S. soldiers, went to Sadi Sadis' town to recover the missing property, and the Chowees resisted. So this agent wrote that the old chief would not give up the animals unless compelled to do so by Army coercion. So the United States Army probably did recover most of these animals, but in doing so, they decided to try to exert more dominance over Pawnee life, Pawnee activities. In late 1848, 2 Army officers visited a Chowee town, and the chief there made a throat-cutting gesture while mentioning Sadis' name. And what the Pawnees called the Sioux were throat cutters, and this was a symbol for it. So what this chief was probably trying to tell these 2 soldiers, these Army officers, was that Sadis was probably out fighting the Sioux. But these Army officers interpreted the chief's motions as saying that the defiant Chowee chief was planning a war against whites. So the following morning, 250 soldiers from Fort Kearny surrounded the Pawnee town, and they had two 12-pound artillery pieces with them. The way that the fight was diverted was that the Pawnee men headed for the hills. They scattered so that a indiscriminate firing into the town would not lead to the loss of innocent lives, of women and children. So after the meeting, the military met with the Pawnees, and a Daily Missouri Republican entry reported that we tried to describe what happened, and he said, "We brought off Sarisaries as a prisoner," meaning that the army took him prisoner, not for what he had done lately, for of late years. I believe he has been killing Sioux and buffalo, but for the misdeeds of his past life. So, they took him to Fort Kearny and detained him for several months without ever filing charges against him. This same chief had recently had his wife killed by a passing wagon train without the U.S. Army taking any action to find a killer or to punish a killer. The arrest and the of Sarisaries and the threat of attack on the Pawnee town, however, did not awe some Pawnees into submission. Pawnees continued to fight skirmishes against the United States Army for the next few years. One of the soldiers stationed at Fort Kearny considered the Pawnees the most dangerous Indians along the Oregon Trail at that time. So, there were a number of casualties that were inflicted on both sides in some of the fighting. In 1854, Congress enacted the Kansas-Nebraska Act, and the territory of Nebraska was established, and that signaled the arrival of settlers in Pawnee country. Most of the Indian nations within Nebraska at that in 1854 ceded their lands to the United States, but the United States government did not try to get another treaty with the Pawnees until 1857. But meanwhile, the settlers began to create problems for Pawnees. They began to steal timber, going onto Pawnee land to steal timber. And the Pawnees would resist it. So these settlers lacked respect for Pawnee property rights. They encroached on lands, and they slaughtered game. When Pawnee officials denied, when white American officials denied Pawnee requests for compensation and relief, young Pawnees took matters into their own hands by taking property from the offenders. They went to Fremont and gave the settlers there 3 days to evacuate the town or face attack, but there was no attack that occurred. So, territorial officials refused to police the actions of their citizens. And the only recourse that Pawnees had was their own power to stop the abuses being committed against them. But to do so could lead to another confrontation with the military that could be disruptive to Pawnee life. So in 1857, the Pawnees did cede the rest of their lands. The Pawnees at this time were in dire economic straits. And they retained a small piece of land, 15 by 30 mile section of land north of the Platte River, right there on the Loup River. They call it the Loup Fork in those years. In return for a small annuity fund in perpetuity. That's the Pawnee word for buffalo. And, the slaughter of the buffalo, which intensified as time went by. This is the Pawnee Reservation, this little section of land. So if you saw the map a while ago, this big section of land, this was all that was left after that treaty. But anyways, the Pawnees accepted a small annuity fund, promises of U.S. government assistance, schools, an assimilation program, which the Pawnees had no intent to assimilate, and they never did consent to the destruction of their way of life. Article 8 of this treaty stated that Pawnees agreed to deliver up to the officers of the United States all offenders against the treaties and laws and regulations of the United States, wherever they may be found, within the limits of their reservation. And they further agreed to assist such officers in discovering, pursuing, and capturing such offender or offenders anywhere, whenever called upon to do so. And the United States government said it could withhold annuities if the Pawnees failed to comply with this term. And it's interesting, this treaty didn't say anything about punishing, the Pawnees have an ability to exert similar types of actions over non-Indians. Anyways, when the Pawnees did not move to their reservation as soon as it was expected by this treaty, conflict erupted. In 1859, the summer of 1859, the Pawnees crossed the Platte River and were going on their hunt. And as they were moving away from their towns, they saw smoke coming up. And some of their men went back to investigate, and they found that those left behind, the infirm, some of the women, children, and the elderly, had been slaughtered. The local settlers blamed the Sioux for this, but the Pawnees who had been fighting the Sioux since the 1820s, knew very well, the difference between a Sioux attack and a Pawnee attack. So they blamed the local settlers for this, and they began to attack the property of white settlers up the Elkhorn Valley, and this led to the sending of troops and from Fort Kearny and territorial militia against the Pawnees. And the action of the head Pawnee chief, I'm a little ahead of myself here. His name is Pita de Sadu, or man chief, as it's interpreted into, got an American flag and rode out and stopped the soldiers and militia from attacking. And in negotiations, the Pawnees agreed to turn over some of the men who had been involved in the destruction of the property and the looting of some of those homesteads of those settlers. So, the fate of those individuals is uncertain. One account said that some of them were killed while trying to escape by the militiamen, and others said that others got away. But so, I haven't found any evidence what happened to them. Again, this shows the disparity of justice that existed. So after that, the Pawnees did move to that small reservation. And on that reservation, the noose of the white racial dictatorship became tightened. And a double standard of justice became more pronounced and troubling to the Pawnees, especially in cases of interracial homicide. In 1859, settlers stole Pawnee horses and killed 2 Pawnee men who went looking for those animals. 6 years later, U.S. soldiers killed 3 Pawnees simply because they failed to identify themselves. In 1865, on the road to Columbus, a settler took out his brand new pistol and shot an elderly Pawnee just to test the firing power of his pistol. And it was a good weapon. That elderly gentleman died. So these incidents did nothing to cause local authorities to press charges against the culprits. The Pawnees were really upset with the killing of the old man, and they wanted compensation, or they wanted justice. When what the United States government did was to recommend that $100 be given to the Pawnees. Then in 1869, a group of Pawnees who had just been recently discharged from the United States Army were killed at Mulberry Creek in Kansas. And a number of them were later decapitated. And their crania were sent to the Army Medical Museum, where the U.S. Army was conducting craniometric studies to try to prove the superiority of the white race. But anyways, about this time, a settler was killed on an island near Columbus, and blame fell on Pawnees who had been camped there. So, when these deaths of Pawnees occurred, not a whimper was raised amongst white officials. But the murder of this one white settler created widespread outrage towards Pawnees. Some people were demanding the extermination of the Pawnees, and they wanted justice to be had. So at this time, this is about the time that the Quakers took control of the Pawnee Agency. It was after that. So, the Quakers, one of their ideas was to assimilate Pawnees into white society. An important step in that process of assimilation was to have the Pawnees subjected to white American laws. So what happened, what was result in what is called the Yellowstone Affair, or the Yellowstone case, was a travesty of justice. White settlers went onto the reservation, demanded that the killers be turned over. The Pawnees refused to do so. They actually held council, tried to find out if there were people responsible, but didn't find out anything. And then this is when the U.S. government took over. And the U.S. agents, these Quakers, evoked the terms of that 1857 treaty that said that if the Pawnees did not hope to find parties who had committed crimes against white people, that their rations could be cut off. These are some of the individuals that were ultimately in this case and tried for McMurtry's death, and that's the name of that settler who was killed. So the annuities at this time had become very important to the Pawnee economy. It was $30,000 in perpetuity that the Pawnees would get in goods and in cash. So these were economic hardship. This was times of economic hardship for the Pawnees. So they could use their annuity goods, they could use their cash to provide provisions. And when the Pawnees, the Quaker agents stopped the annuities from coming to the Pawnees reluctantly turned over a number of men who were taken to Omaha. And there was still no evidence against these individuals who were turned over to authorities. So what the U.S. prosecutors did was to hatch another scheme in conjunction with those Mormons that they would, Quakers, getting my religious groups mixed up here, that they would stop the upcoming Pawnee hunt until the Pawnees gained evidence against those individuals. So the Pawnee chiefs went to Omaha and met in council with those 8 individuals to try to find out if they knew anything about what had happened to that settler, how he had been killed or why he had been killed, or even if they were responsible. And they found no evidence. But nevertheless, a U.S. grand jury indicted 3 individuals, horse driver, Little Wolf, and the individual that I showed in the picture, this elderly Pawnee gentleman by the name of Yellow Sun. And later, a grand jury indicted a 4th individual by the name of Blue Hawk, who went to the Pawnee Reservation and arrested the first Blue Hawk that he came across. And there were several Blue Hawks within the Pawnee Reservation. And those people who knew the Pawnees knew this and questioned whether the right Blue Hawk had been arrested. Anyways, these 4 Pawnees were put on trial with U.S. Federal Judge Elmer Dundee presiding. And the prosecution still lacked evidence. There was no credible witnesses to this event. There was no self-incrimination by any of the evidence. So the prosecution, however, had the race card on its side, the racial attitudes of Nebraskans towards Indians. You know, in that environment, could a panel of 12 jurists be selected who lacked racial biases for a crime in which Indians were accused of killing a white settler? The answer was no. The Omaha Herald actually did a good job of reporting about this incident and said in the end that these 4 individuals were convicted on evidence that would not convict Negroes in Omaha for stealing chickens. Anyways, these individuals suffered while they were in jail, and I think that's why that picture of Yellow Sun we saw earlier with him looking so skinny is a reflection on the harsh confinement that they were under. So these individuals were convicted and before of capital murder. And what we see is the Quakers beginning to advocate the death penalty. They wanted to approach U.S. officials, the judge, and have him condemn these individuals to death. Quakers, pacifists, people who don't believe in the capital punishment, the sense of capital punishment, advocating a death penalty. Well, the reason why they wanted to go to U.S. Grant, the president, and have him to commute the sentences of most of those individuals except for Yellow Sun, so that they could be freed or serve less time. But anyways, before anything was done, Dundee decided that the issue of jurisdictions should be determined because this incident had happened off reservation. And it was determined that the state had jurisdiction rather than the federal government. And the state tried to hold trial several times, but no, they couldn't get anyone to come to Lincoln. A change of venue was granted to testify on their behalf. So those individuals were released in 1871 on a writ of habeas corpus. And most of them, probably 3 of them, died as a result of their harsh confinement. Okay, so meanwhile, armed white settlers began to come onto Pawnee Reservation and steal timber. And there was no relief for the Pawnees. Actually, the white racial dictatorship noose even tightened. The federal government tried to stop Pawnee patrols from keeping these settlers off of Pawnee land. So it was a situation where Pawnees had no justice. They could get no justice under the white system of jurisdiction. And a number of Pawnees began to decide to move to Oklahoma to try to escape this white racial dictatorship. And one individual, he's identified in the records as Estadostes. I'm not sure what even language that's in, but it could be Big Spotted Horse, who was a Pawnee, who was one of those who led the first group of Pawnees to remove to Oklahoma. And what he said is really important to this national council that met in Tahlequah. He said, "We can scarcely move without disturbing some white person. If a Pawnee lays his hand on a stick of timber or grass, the white man says, 'Hold, this is mine.' If a Pawnee horse gets beyond the limits of the narrow reserve, he need not hunt him. We are surrounded up there on all sides by the white man, and I and my people will come here and surrender our part to him. So a couple years later, all Pawnees were removed to Oklahoma. And so the ethnic cleansing of Pawnees from Nebraska has been kind of completed. But we're back. We come back to rebury our dead that were stolen in the name of science. We come back to give lectures, to teach about the history of our people, to talk about these hard, cold, cruel facts of the relationship that existed, and to show you that there are solutions to our problems. We've formed a Pawnee Nation College in Oklahoma, educating our young people and others, non-Indians. We're trying to indigenize education for all by providing a good education. We've been in operation about 4 years, and I don't myself in a picture that says wisdom. I guess I was kind of stretching things, but this is our board of trustees, and this Elizabeth Blackow, Julia Goodfox, who are also on the board of trustees, and this is our future, our graduates, and we have survived. Okay, out of time?